Good afternoon. As this year's festival director, I'm so delighted to welcome you to this event for the love of translation. It's our inaugural event. It's one that's really near and dear to my heart. It was inspired by a reading group called Publishing the World that I co-founded with my partner in crime, Samantha Steele, sitting right there, of the French Publishers Agency. So over the past 2 years, Publishing the World, we've interrogated various works and translations and have invited their editors and translators to participate in that process, to see how these works are born in English. I see in this audience, and on the panelists themselves, a lot of these members who have participated in these conversations. With this event, we wanted to pay homage to that very partnership, the partnership between literary editors and translators, and to rightfully elevate translated literature. The process of publishing a translation is a precarious adventure, as many of you know. And I hope that the stories today will illuminate the many journeys of translated literature. I'm so thankful for our panelists and our moderators for being a part of this inaugural event. You guys are translation uber stars, so thank you so much. And now I have the great privilege to introduce a passionate ally of translated literature and this year's cherished festival chair, Monique Truong. So Monique Truong is a Vietnamese-American writer based in Brooklyn, New York. Her first novel, The Book of Salt, was a national bestseller among a New York Times notable fiction book and a recipient of the New York Public Library Young Lions Fiction Award, among other honors. Her second novel, Bitter in the Mouth, received the American Academy of Arts and Letters Rosenthal Family Foundation Award and was named a Best Fiction Book of the Year by Barnes & Noble and Hudson Booksellers. Truong is a 2015 U.S.-Japan Creative Artist Fellow. She was a 2012 visiting writer at the Helsinki Collegium for Advanced Studies, a 2010 Guggenheim Fellow, and a 2007 Princeton University's Hodder Fellow. In the fall of 2016, Monique Truong will be the Sidney Harman Writer-in-Residence at Baruch College. Truong is also a graduate of Yale and Columbia Law School. Please join me in welcoming Monique Truong.
Hello. It feels like a cabaret in here. Thanks to you for being here on what feels like an incredibly balmy day, given the past 2 days, right? It feels spring-like to me. And, you know, I just want to say that what I'm going to say now, I mean, given the attendees in this room, I hope that you'll take it more as an appreciation than an exhortation. So, I think that one of the things that is often overlooked at such international literary gatherings is that we, the festival, the authors, and the audience members and the readers could not convene in this vital way without the works of literary translators. In Walter Benjamin's 1921 essay, The Task of the Translator, he eloquently argues that literary translation is a form, and by that he means an art form. Benjamin writes, "A translation, instead of imitating the sense of the original, must lovingly and in detail incorporate the original's way of meaning, thus making both the original and the translation recognizable as fragments of a greater language." There is, however, a differing strain of thought that relegates the literary translator into the role of the faithful, abiding technician. It insists that a good translation should lull the reader into believing that the work was written in the language of the reader. It downplays that a transformative act has taken place. This denial of the translator's art form, too conveniently, as you know, also supports the alarming and steady devaluation of their worth and compensation within the increasingly narrowed economy of publishing. As an author of 2 novels that have been translated into 13 languages, I know firsthand the benefit of having been translated. For me, it begins at the moment of correspondence with my translators. Their questions often require that I re-examine my word choices, my double entendres, my euphemisms, all the implied and secret meanings of the vocabulary of my characters. I reveal to my translators, in essence, the secret codes of my texts. In fact, I consider it less of a revelation and more of an entrustment. I have created my art form, and now it is their turn. I have been fairly compensated for my art form, and so should they. As Jose Saramago said, writers create national literatures with their language, but world literature is written by translators. Now, I see that over there's a table of all of our, most of our writers at the festival, and I really do hope that you'll take this opportunity to meet them in person and also on the page, because I think that you'll find that their contribution to German language literature is insightful, enthralling, sly, and often incredibly heartbreaking. And of course, thanks to the art of their literary translators, it's also a contribution to world literature. So now it's my pleasure to introduce you to the moderator of today's panel. And her name is Sal Robinson. And she's been an editor for international literature at Houghton Mifflin Harcourt and Melville House. With Bill Martin, she runs a reading series focused on translation, The Bridge, with monthly events at McNally Jackson Books and other sites around New York. Sal Robinson.
Thanks, Monique, and thank you all for coming to For the Love of Translation. When I saw the title of this panel, I thought this is great because it has an immediate meaning, right? Doing something for the love of it. But it also sounds like, for the love is the start of a curse. It's the start of like a mild oath, like for the love of Pete or for the love of God. So I was spending some, totally irreverent time thinking about For the Love of Translation as a new curse that I could use. So for this event, we've brought together 4 pairs of editors and translators to talk about the process of editing translations and how that might differ from working on an English language text or not. They've each worked together on a very diverse set of projects, from which I hope we'll be able to get a sense of the variety of experiences that editors and translators can encounter, and maybe some of the commonalities as well. I'm going to talk to them one pair at a time, and then we'll open things up for questions at the end. So if you notice vast gaps in what's being discussed, prepare your questions for the end bit. And so first I'm going to welcome Katie and Susan to the stage. So let me tell you a little bit about this pair. Katie is publisher and editor-in-chief of STONECUTTER Journal. And this is STONECUTTER, a previous edition. It's an annual magazine of art and literature, which focuses on international writers and artists alongside U.S. ones as well. The 5th issue is coming out, or has come out?
No, it's coming out.
It's coming out?
A labor of love. So it'll be out in September, I hope.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There'll be a party. You're all invited.
Nice. Katie also works full-time as an associate editor at Grove Atlantic, where she edits literary fiction and memoirs. She lives in Brooklyn now, but she's originally from Cork. Next to her is Susan Bernofsky. Susan directs the literary translation program in the School of the Arts at Columbia University. She's translated over 20 books, including 7 by the great Swiss-German modernist author Robert Walser, and as well as the little-known Franz Kafka, Hermann Hesse, and recently The End of Days by Jenny Erpenbeck. Her many prizes and awards include a Guggenheim Fellowship this year, as well as the Helen and Kurt Wolff Translation Prize and the Hermann Hesse Translation Prize. And she runs a really useful blog, wonderful blog called Translationista that covers translation events and translation issues. So today we're going to talk about Andrea Grill's novel, The Beautiful and the Necessary, which is excerpted in this issue of Stonecutter in Susan's translation, and issue 2. And there's actually a little festival history because I guess Andrea was a guest of the festival a couple years.
2011, I think.
Okay, and you were the organizer.
Yeah, I was curating that year, and she
Okay.
was one of the festival authors, just like you guys, and here she is in the magazine on the subject of a panel.
Cool. Can you tell us a little bit about the excerpt and the book?
So Andrea Grill is an Austrian writer. She's also got a degree in biology and works as a scientist, but also writes books and has done some journalistic work. And the book that we selected for the Festival Neue Literatur in 2011, The Beautiful and the Necessary, is this fabulous farce-like story about these two down-on-their-luck guys who are roommates, and one of them's sort of employed and the other one's sort of unemployed, and they need to figure out something to do with their lives, and they hatch this tremendous idea to kidnap a civet cat from the zoo, where one of them is semi-employed, for purposes of causing that cat to eat coffee beans and poop out, better coffee beans that they can sell and get rich. And so, it's a plot that's destined to end in hilarious failure, and it's a very funny story. And I just loved the book. The writing is very funny. The characters are lovable and hapless, and so I translated Usually as the curator, you don't do a lot of the translation yourself because you're running around curating and doing a million other things. But I translated this one because I liked it so much.
Great. And Katie, how did you encounter the piece? Did Susan bring it to you? Or?
I spend a lot of my time just basically chasing people whose work I admire for work for Stonecutter. And I had encountered Susan's work. I used to work at New Directions, and they publish a lot of Susan's translations, and I was totally enamored with her Walser translations in particular, and your Erpenbach. So I was a huge kind of fan, and I wrote to Susan to ask if she had anything in her cache to kind of send my way, and you very graciously looked and said, well, I have this. And I read the piece and loved it. I thought it was beautifully written in English, translated. I mean, Susan's English language translations are impeccable, and the humor of the original was incredible, and I loved its kind of Beckettian, madcap, absurd undertones, and I just jumped on it. So that was how it happened.
A book's still looking for a publisher, by the way.
Yeah, the full length is still looking, yeah.
Yeah, publishers in the audience. Yeah,
So good plug.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you both what it was like working on just a part of a book rather than a full project. Did that, Susan, when you were translating, did that, bear on the translation at all, or did you just sort of take it for what it was?
Well, I did a selection. I didn't begin at the beginning of the book.
Okay.
So because my feeling was, okay, I want to make everybody else like this book as much as I do, so I'm going to select what I think are the most immediately appealing scenes. So I picked some scenes from the middle, I think 2 different chunks, and put them together. So the translation process began with a selection process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one aspect of the piece that's really interesting is that the characters are talking, but it's not attributed, so you sort of have to find your way into it and figure out who's speaking.
There's no quote marks either.
Right.
So is it dialogue? Is it not dialogue?
It's dialogue.
If you're not sure whether it's dialogue or not, it was dialogue.
But that's part of what I really loved about this excerpt that Susan had chosen to translate, was that the inner worlds of the characters are kind of configured in their own exchanges with the world, and in their dialogue together it's very kind of quick and brief, and they don't share that much of their internal ways of thinking. It kind of comes out when they're on their own, like freaking out about stealing the cat and polar bear extinction and things like that. So it's really, yeah.
I have to say, one of the funnest things about translating that excerpt was there was so much dialogue in it, and the dialogue is funny. And I rarely get to, like Kafka, fun dialogue. Robert Walser, fun dialogue. I mean, there's some dialogue, a little, but the dialogue in Robert Walser sounds like, long Baroque sentences, just like everything else. And I don't get to translate enough fun dialogue. And
Yeah.
it made me really happy to do that.
And very conversational feeling as well.
Yeah. And the register changes quite a bit because there are these passages where there's sort of scientific definitions, and then there's banter, and then there's even these sort of lyrical passages where one of the characters is in love with this woman, and he every day he takes his train ride, and he flies a kite out the window because he knows that she's working in the field nearby, and he lets the kite go out the window, and it's this like beautiful, beautiful moment.
Yeah, and he's otherwise a kind of a hapless idiot character, and then he reveals these like inner depths when he's on the train and sending this kite up.
So, Katie, this was 4 years ago. Do you remember much of like what we talked about in the editing process? Because I was trying to reconstruct it, and I know there was an editing process, and we changed some things, but I don't remember what.
I think I kind of cheated and refreshed my memory, because Susan and I had a brief exchange about the panel, and we were like, I don't really remember this.
It's 4 years ago.
It was a long time ago.
It's almost a half century.
I do remember that it came very much as a holistically, well-written piece. So there wasn't so much that I had to do as an editor. I gave Susan a very light, kind of copy edit more than anything. And in terms of the dialogue, I think I made it more casual sounding in places, like got rid of some of the proper articles and things like that, so that it didn't feel as like just stiff. It was very light, though. It was really so gentle, because
I remember there was definitely line editing, and I want to say, as a translator, getting to work with great editors is okay. So one of the second book that I ever translated, the first book I translated for a major publishing house, was a memoir by Gregor von Ritzori, in English called Anecdotage, and I was a young translator. I translated one book by Robert Walser before, and it was my second job. And the editor on that book, the acquiring editor, was Elizabeth Sifton, who some of you may know of, just a legendary editor and author at Ferris Strauss. And she had worked with Gregor von Ritzori for years and had given him carte blanche to really edit the crap out of his books, including the kind of editing that editors of translations usually are not, quote unquote, allowed to do, like cutting entire paragraphs, rearranging sections of the book, because he said that he wasn't well edited in German, and so he wanted to take advantage of the good editing, history and tradition in the U.S. to get a good edit. And so she edited his work and my translation. And at the end of looking at her edits, I thought that I probably should have paid her for the learning experience, as opposed to having been paid, not hugely, but something for doing the translation. And I've worked with so many editors over the years, and it's always educational to see, because when you're translating, you're thinking, okay, it's me. There's the book, and then there's me, and my vision of the book is the book. But that's not actually always really true. When you're a translator, you get obsessed with how this book sounds to you, and you may lose track of what it's likely to sound like to another person. And the editor is that fresh eye who is, in many cases, not corrupted really by the knowledge of the original. And so getting to work with an editor like Katie, saying, recasting the dialogue. I'm writing dialogue based on German dialogue, and it may sound good to me, but to someone who's used to editing dialogue will say, that still sounds really weird. So, thank you, editors everywhere, is, I guess, what I want to say, including Katie.
Thank you, translators, including Susan.
All right, love fest.
It was just picking up on what you were saying there about those. I don't have any German. I'm gonna maybe, get barraged for that, saying it in a room full of German translators, but I don't, and I'm very sad that I don't. But in a way, I can't remember who it was now, but it was another editor who works very closely with translation, said sometimes, it's better to not have the language that you are working with in the translation, because it allows you to come to it, just like Susan was saying, just focusing solely on how will this read for an American audience or for an English language audience, as opposed to like, how faithful is it? And faithfulness is important, but sometimes it can stifle the translation as well, because people will transliterate or keep these kind of like more clunky ways of phrasing things because it's truer, you know, like idioms and things like that. So.
And then all the characters run around saying things like, "We see us tomorrow, yes," and and I was like, "Sounds okay to me." All the German speakers in the room are nodding. It's like, sure.
Yeah, yours was pretty perfect. So, but.
I fished for compliments successfully.
Nice.
Now, Katie, how do you find pieces in translation? Do you work for the magazine? Are you working with the same translators over and over again, or are you just sort of keeping your eyes open?
Well, with STONECUTTER, I really haven't published the same people twice yet. I hope that, you know, I like to stay friends with the people I work with, and I hope that if they think of something that's good for STONECUTTER, they'll send it to me. But I basically just read as much as I can and find the work that I really admire, and then try and find the people that do it and ask them very kindly. And there's no skill to it other than just like, I love you, please. Please will you send me something? And they're really, I've been very, very, very lucky because I've worked with some amazing translators. I mean, every issue of STONECUTTER features like a handful of really incredible, like I want to say the world's best translators. And I'm going to say it, all right, the world's best translators. So yeah, that's pretty much how I source things. I just read and keep my ear to the ground as much as possible and rely on a mate like Susan for issue 3 sent Christopher Middleton my way, which was a kind of a life-changing experience for me, because he and I struck up a very nice friendship, and it was just amazing. Yeah, and we published his original poetry, not his translation, but it was, I mean, he's like our last living modernist, so it was amazing. Thanks, Susan. Sure. Belated, like 4 years later, but thank you.
So, Susan, there are a number of authors that you translate regularly, like Jenny Erpenbeck. What is that like, and do you feel like you're looking for new authors to like add to your list, to like Susan's list, or?
I'm just going to expire here.
Yeah. I'll be asking a very polite question. So just what is that experience like? Do you sort of learn more and more about kind of what they're doing with each novel? I know Yoko Tawada as well.
Yeah, and the next book that I'm supposed to translate is a Yoko Tawada. Oh, by the way, Yoko Tawada is in town right now. She's in residency at NYU, and she will be speaking with Rivka Galchen at Deutsches Haus at NYU on the 27th. Just saying. But it's public service announcements. Yeah, get me started on the FNL. We can do the FNL public service. No, but I love working with an author over time because, especially in those two cases, Yoko Tawada and Jenny Erpenbeck, in both cases, the book of theirs that I started with was their first book, or in Yoko Tawada's case, the first book written in German. And that means that as they grew as writers, I could, be part of that, and that felt really exciting. Like Jenny Erpenbeck is someone, her first book that she published, and that also the first one I translated, The Story of the Old Child. It's a brilliant book and has this wild, strange energy to it, and there's this whole backstory about how she did all this insane research to make it happen, things that do not appear in the book but happen sort of around the making of the book, and she created this artistic practice around how she writes, and that book already had that strange energy, but she hadn't yet developed her obsession with history in narrative. And so she's added that, layered that over the sort of narrative weirdness in the way she creates character. And it produces this, I think the most recent book of hers, Aller Tage Abend, which I translated and it appeared under the title The End of Days. I think it's her best book to date, but it's been really exciting to watch her grow. And I'm thinking, you keep going, Jenny. You keep, I keep seeing her, this is our fourth book together, and every book is, I think, better than the one before, because she hasn't peaked yet as a writer, and she's in her mid to late 40s now, and you know, she's still writing better books each time. So I'm like, you keep going, you know.
Nice.
You know, let's see where this goes.
Right, right.
So yeah, so I'm the cheering squad as well as the translator.
Oh, good. That's great. So I think we're going to move on to our second pair. But thank you so much.
Fun.
Thank you, Sal. This was
Thank you.
great.